Hi, my name is Zach Dewhurst and I'm the owner of PrintPhase. Screen printing is the most often used decoration process for printing apparel and accessory products. Screen printing is not only the most used decoration process, but it's also one of the oldest. It became very popular in the 1960s after Andy Warhol used it to create reprints of his artwork. Screen printing really hasn't changed that much over the last 6 decades, as it primarily involves using screens, emulsions, and film positives to create a stencil that can then have ink pulled through it and printed onto a product. Now, screen printing all starts with what you would think, a screen. Screens first come just like this, essentially with nothing on them. What we do then is take a blank screen and we use a scoop coater and emulsion, essentially glue, to coat a screen. By pulling up onto the screen onto both sides, we coat a screen, taking it from essentially a blank canvas to a primed canvas ready to be then burned and then printed with. Now, how it all starts is we first must color separate digital artwork. We must use digital artwork so that the lines are nice, smooth, and straight. Each color within the design must have its own film positive and then screen burned in order to print that color. Essentially, when we're screen printing, each color is printed individually, meaning that each color must have its own designated screen. Now, a film positive is printed using a film positive printer, which essentially lays a very thick coat layer of black ink onto a transparent film. Here's an example of a film positive. Now, this is a 2-color design, and as you can see, each color has its own film, and then when you bring them together, they actually come together just like that. Now, in our example, we're actually going to use this 1-color design. What we're going to do is we're going to take our coated screen of emulsion, and we're going to load it onto here, and then we're going to take our film and we're going to tape it to the actual screen, just using your typical Scotch tape. This is going to allow the image to be placed directly in the middle of the screen, which will then be burned using an exposure unit. And if you actually could see through this, you actually could see that the ink is actually blocking the side of the emulsion, and you can see where the image is going to be burned. Once we have our film positive taped to the screen, we need to expose the screen using ultraviolet light within an exposure unit. What we're going to do is we're going to lay the screen with the film positive on the back side, and we're going to, again, expose the screen. Within this box are UV lights, essentially black lights, that will burn the image into the screen. And wherever the film is blocking the screen with the ink, that is going to be the exposed area that will become a stencil. The length of time that we expose a screen is all dependent on the mesh count and type of emulsion that we are using. Now, screens come in many different mesh counts, starting around 50 all the way up to over 300. And what the mesh count represents is the amount of dots, or essentially mesh holes, within a square inch. So just like DPI represents dots per inch, the mesh count represents the mesh holes per inch, and again ranges between 50 to over 300 in count. The higher the mesh count, the more detail that can be obtained within the design. Now, the higher the mesh, not only the more detail, but the less ink that is laid down. When it comes to screen printing and screen print transfers, we require a thick coat of ink, meaning that we cannot use mesh counts higher than 160, and we can't go lower than 60. Now, the type of mesh that we actually use for the screen all depends on the type of ink that we're using and the color. Lighter colors like white or yellows have a lot of white pigment in them, making them very thick and difficult to print with, meaning that they need to use a lower mesh count, typically around an 86 to 110, while metallic and glitter inks, which are also very thick, need to use a 60 mesh count, allowing them to lay down a lot of ink, but preventing them from holding fine details such as black inks, which have very little pigment and are very thin, essentially very easy to work with. Now that the screen has been exposed, we are now ready to wash out the design, revealing a stencil that we will then pull ink through to print the artwork. First, we're going to remove the film positive and put the screen in our industrial sink, and we're going to simply wash it out with water by spraying the inside and the outside of the screen. Emulsion breaks down with water. So essentially, as you hit the screen with water, you're breaking down all of the area where the film positive was blocking the light when it was being exposed. Before there were exposure units, screens could be essentially burned by going outside and holding it up to the light, which essentially the sun would then burn and expose the screen. If you've noticed, we're actually in a light-sensitive environment. This is called a dark room, and the reason we're in a dark room is we don't want to pre-expose the screens before we're ready to burn them. Essentially, we don't want any UV light coming into this room while we're either coating, cleaning, or burning a screen. Now, washing out a screen takes around 5 minutes as the water has to break down the emulsion, and from there we'll actually have a finished stencil that we can then print with. Now that our exposed screen has had time to dry, we are left with a finished stencil that we can print with. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take our screen print ink and we're going to load it onto the squeegee side of the screen. From here, we're actually going to use our squeegee to pull the ink through the screen, transferring the ink from the squeegee side through the screen onto our product. Now, most of the time with screen printing, you're actually going to direct screen print onto a t-shirt or other type of apparel. But we often screen print directly onto a screen print transfer, which can then be heat applied onto a wide range of products. There are many advantages of using screen print transfers over direct screen printing, but if you're going to demand a large run of multiple colors, direct screen printing may be the better option over screen print transfers. Once we're finished printing, we're actually going to just take our product, drop it on our dryer, and essentially the dryer is going to cure the print by applying heat to it. By curing the actual print, or in our case, our transfer, we're going to allow the print to actually be able to be washed many different times without actually breaking down, in which the ink cracks or peels off of the actual shirt. When it comes to screen printing, there are many different types of presses and way that you can print. This is a single head press. Most of the time when you see screen printing, you see actually a carousel press that spins, in which the bottom boards, the platens, spin along with the print heads, in which it allows you to print multiple colors and different screens when you're actually printing a design. Also, there are manual and automatic screen printing presses. This is a manual press because we're actually going to manually pull the ink through the using the squeegee through the screen onto the product. An automatic press essentially uses a foot pedal, in which you'll actually just press the pedal, the screen will actually come down and then actually print the design. When it comes to screen printing, there are many variables, including the squeegee angle, pressure, the flood bar pressure, and the flood bar angle. And all of these can be a little bit hard to get consistently right. An automatic screen printing press is going to deliver the exact same press with every single print, versus if you're manually printing, it's going to differ from shirt to shirt. And when you actually print, you're actually going to see the finished product be a little bit different when you manually print compared to the automatic, which is always consistently the exact same variable settings. So let's go ahead and screen print a transfer and see how the process works. The final step in the screen printing process is to reclaim a screen. Now, we removed all of the ink and the tape from the screen, And from here, we're going to actually remove all of the emulsion, essentially the pink stuff on this screen, and then we're going to further clean this screen to remove any other chemicals or oils that may exist within the screen. So, to reclaim the screen, we actually spray the screen with a chemical called a reclaimer. And what it's going to do is it's going to actually break down the emulsion from the screen. And with the use of water, which also is again a kryptonite for emulsion, it'll essentially break down all that emulsion until it becomes kind of a gooey substance, and then using a power washer we can drive all the emulsion off of the screen. Now that all of the emulsion has been removed from the screen, the last part of the reclaiming process is to actually degrease the screen, in which we're going to remove any other chemicals or oils that may exist within the screen. You want the screen to be as clean as possible when it goes to dry and then be recoated with emulsion. If there's any dry chemicals or even degreasing chemicals within the screen, when you go to dry it, you'll actually not be able to coat the screen cleanly and get a good print from there. So again, the entire decoration process of screen printing starts with using good screens. That means that they must be completely clean and they have good tension around all four corners of the screen. So to degrease the screen, all we're going to use is a chemical to actually essentially wipe the screen down, and then we'll spray it with water to get any chemicals or oils that may exist. When it comes to screen printing, we actually use many different chemicals. And when it comes to using chemicals, it's very important that you actually use them for the directed amount of time. Essentially, the chemical needs time to actually do its job. And in this case, to clean the screen, it actually only takes around 10 seconds versus when we were using the emulsion remover, the reclaimer, it took much longer to actually break down the emulsion from the screen. Now that we have the screen degreased, all we have to do is actually rinse it with water, and from there we can actually recoat the screen. If you have any questions on how screen printing works, please do not hesitate contacting us. Thank you.